Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. I'm Tosha Anderson. I'm your host. I am here with my friend Fielding Jezreel. You are the founder and principal of Jezreel Consulting. Excuse me, I can't clear my throat today. And we're going to be talking about, I think, the elephant in the room for everybody, or maybe not even the elephant in the room, because I certainly think it's being discussed everywhere. We're going to be talking about federal grants. Fielding, you are like the queen of all federal grants, I feel like. You are the person that I know that really specializes in this space. You've spent a lot of time in this space. You've worked with so many different organizations. I think I saw some on your website. You've helped secure over $135 million in funding. You know things from strategy on pre-reward, how to get the applications, coaching people along the way, program development to make sure that it's in line. You and I have done co-presentations on like the programmatic compliance side, the federal compliance, the funding finance compliance side from my perspective. So we've had lots of really good conversations about this. But you and I have had offline conversations about the state of federal funding and what does that look like for nonprofits. And we've decided let's have a conversation about it on this podcast. So first and foremost, before we dive in, thank you for taking time out of your very hectic, up and down, all of the things going on in your life right now for having this conversation with me. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It feels like the right time to be having this conversation. I think in general, organizations feel scared about federal grants anyway,
Right.
and nothing is scarier, honestly, than just not knowing what the heck is going on. And that's a
Yeah.
space we all find ourselves in. And so I think we're all tired of hearing about unprecedented times, but that's where we
Hmm.
are when it comes
Hmm.
to federal grants. And so yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. Hopefully we can bring the pressure down on some of this and talk about what's real and what's not and like how to navigate things and what to be paying attention to in 2025 and likely 2026
Yeah.
as well.
Mhm.
And I'll also just say I don't have all the answers, right? I mean, that's part of the challenge right now is no one has all of the answers.
Yeah.
So, we're having this conversation in June and oh heck, July, August, September, who knows what's coming.
Yeah.
So we'll do our best, and not we may not have all the answers.
Yeah. I don't think anybody has all the answers. That's certainly true. So, as we've already established, and we all know, federal grants are super messy right now, from delays to tighter restrictions. And I think, frankly, even the most obvious, the back and forth on whether is my funding frozen, is it cut, or conversations that we're having now on just will these grants be renewed once that contract period is up. These are all concerns and conversations that I've been having with my clients. But I'm curious to know from you, Fielding, what are you seeing right now, and how are you navigating this with your clients?
Yeah. So, the way that I work with clients is often in a year-round basis from a consulting perspective. So I'm paying attention to what's out there. I'm helping them navigate changes, and I do some writing for them. But really, the base of the contract is like help us stay aligned, right, with what's happening.
Hmm.
Help us strategize. Help us see what's coming down. And one of the challenges right now with that work is like what is coming out, right? So what do we know in 2025? Well,
Hmm.
we know what's supposed to be in the budget, right? We have assigned continuing resolution, and that should mean certain grants are rolling out. And if we'd had this conversation a month ago, I would have said there's nothing out there. And
Hmm.
today, we're seeing tranches of grants released agency by agency. So um, I'm not 100% on this, but I think what we're going to see through maybe mid-July, late July, is all of the agencies sort of release in tranches whatever it is that they need to get out the door this year, right? So we're going to continue to see 5, 10, 15 grant opportunities all be released from a single agency within a week, sometimes even
Hmm.
just in a single day. So that shows that agencies are working through these processes, these new executive orders, the new priorities of the administration, and they're figuring out, okay, how do we sort of marry these new priorities with what is in the budget and needs to be
Hmm.
spent by the agencies? and obligated to organizations by the end of September when a new budget period starts on October 1st, right?
Right.
So we're sort of up against this wall right now. Like agencies have to get these opportunities out the door so that organizations can apply, they can be reviewed,
Hmm.
and they can get through a contracting process, right? So
Yeah.
we're really like, it's going to be tight. So for that reason, what I am saying to clients right now and what we've been doing for the last couple of months is let's get really, really clear, not just on whether we're going to be eligible, which is
Hmm.
always a conversation,
Hmm.
but secondarily, are we willing, right? Are we willing
Hmm.
to write in a grant application that we will adhere to specific executive orders if that is required in the instructions?
Yeah.
Right. And I have clients who say, yep, we're willing to say on paper that we will, follow all the rules and regulations. And sort of the between the lines is that we'll follow executive orders, even though they're not law, right?
Right.
And I think the hope there is that some of these legal battles play out. The executive orders are found to be unenforceable for federal grants, which seems like a likely conclusion. Um, but I also have clients who are saying, and I'm hearing from other organizations as well, like we can't say that, that we're going to agree to these executive orders because they directly impact the populations we want to serve. We're
Hmm.
not going to pretend entire groups of people don't exist or
Right.
that they don't experience differences in treatment and care because of their identities. And
Right.
so part of those conversations now are not just, are we ready? Are we eligible? It's, are we ready? Are we eligible? And are we willing to twist our language and twist the way that we talk about our service populations? And I'm not here to say that like one is good or one is bad. I think this is a conversation that has to be happening regardless
Yeah.
of what decision an organization makes. It needs to be having that conversation. So that's been a piece at least of kind of what I've been trying to help clients navigate. The other piece of this I would say is like we're not automatically saying we're not applying to federal grants.
Hmm.
There are still and so I should preface this by saying I work primarily with organizations that are of and for a specific community.
Hmm.
And so they're not, they're really sensitive, right, to some of the language pieces. They're really connected to their communities in ways that some, mega organizations really aren't in some
Yeah.
ways. And so um, what I have been saying to my clients is number one, we don't stop completely, right? We're paying attention, we're seeing what's coming. And if we stop, not just my clients, but like as grassroots organizations, as community-based organizations, if we stop applying across the board, we are signaling to these agencies, we are signaling to Congress, we are signaling to the current administration that maybe we didn't need this money after all. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's really scary. That's
Hmm.
not where, in some ways, applying for this money has become a way of advocacy, right? It's
Hmm.
become a way to say, we're here, we do need this money. This is critical infrastructure in our country, and we're not going to back down just because you say we can't use words and that certain people don't exist.
Hmm.
Make them
Yeah.
say no to us.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I'm curious, have you seen any changes to requirements for in terms of just compliance, or what are the significant changes in federal funding compliance in 2025 as a result of these executive orders, whether it's new grant applications that have opened up already and become available? Like, what are you seeing the kind of the old way of doing things versus what the new expectations are, if that makes sense?
It does. It does. So the first thing I'll say is what I'm seeing in 2025 is not necessarily what I expect to see in 2026. The
Okay.
reason for that is, again, there is pressure to get grant applications out the door at this point.
Hmm.
We're also seeing lots and lots of the pieces that I'm about to talk about being challenged in court. And so whether this holds throughout 2025 and into 2026, we don't know.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, a sense of like fear or trepidation about 2026 because there will also be more time to rework a lot of these opportunities in like and really formalize these what new opportunities look like versus what they looked like in 2024. So the things that I think I'm paying attention to the most. So number one, the executive order around DEI and what
Mhm.
constitutes illegal DEI versus DEI. And some of what I'm about to say was informed by a presentation that I attended by Bird Guest. So I would just encourage anyone who's like deep in this DEI stuff to go check out their work.
Mhm.
Really fabulous in terms of breaking down sort of what is illegal versus legal DEI. So I don't want to claim that I'm completely summarizing all of their thoughts, but my takeaways from that presentation and kind of other things I've pieced together. So number one, DEI itself is not illegal, right? So full stop, DEI itself is not illegal, and it has never been.
Mhm.
And so I think the challenge of the executive orders is that there is the phrase illegal DEI and there is the phrase DEI. And
Mm.
when you read an executive order, you think maybe it's all the same thing, right? Because you can't do
Mhm.
illegal DEI. Now you can't do DEI, right? Like what do we really
Mm.
mean when we say DEI and what do we mean when we say illegal DEI? So, to get a little bit technical here, it has always been the case that when you receive federal money, you could not say that you are only serving
Mm.
women,
Mhm.
even if it came out of the Women's Business Center, for
Right.
example. You
Right.
still had to sign documentation or verbally agree with a program officer that you would serve anyone who comes to your
Right.
program,
Right. Right.
assessing them the same way. And so I work with an organization that serves women specifically, and they've had to
Mhm.
say for years, we'll serve anyone who, but our primary
Mm.
like population we outreach to are women, and this is why.
Sure. Right.
Same thing with like let's talk about arts programming. So I've got a
Right.
client who does arts programming specific to Black youth in our
Mhm.
community. They have had to sign something with the NEA for years saying
Right.
any child who meets the age requirements is still allowed to participate, right? So to the extent that you could never use federal funding
Right.
to say to exclude someone from
Right.
programming,
Right. Yeah.
that's still the case, and
Gotcha.
that's not new,
Gotcha.
right? And so we have to be careful about assuming that everything that is being said is like completely new and terrible. Um, and obviously you need to pay a little bit more attention right now. So here's an example of something that might have flown under the previous
Mhm.
administration, but absolutely would not fly now. Let's say you were going to do DEI specific training and you
Mhm.
were to say, um, all of our white employees are going to go to this training, and
Mm.
all of our employees who are not white are going to go to another training. And that might make sense to a DEI practitioner. There might be good, valid reasons for them to take that approach. Federal funding is not going to fund that.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that might have been approved under a previous administration. It's not going to get approved under this administration. In
Right.
fact,
Right.
it's probably just going to get the entire thing flagged.
Yeah.
So part of this is like, what are we paying attention to, and being really clear about understanding the history of that particular issue in the
Mhm.
context of like what are the actual laws around this, right?
Mhm.
What have previous administrations said, and what is this administration actually saying, which can be very confusing because I wouldn't say like direct and clear communication is a strength of this administration, and maybe that's on purpose, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah.
So, and so I, hear you loud and clear. That's an interesting distinction too, by the way. So thank you for clarifying that with DEI. And I think that makes sense because like you, I've been in and around the space for many, many years and probably in every example, but you're using feds as an example for when you sign, especially government funded contracts, oftentimes you must sign some sort of anti-discrimination policy, or whether you either need to submit it your own and they need to say, yeah, that's in accordance with how we operate and you're not going to discriminate against anybody on the basis of whether employment or independent contractors you might hire as a result of this or people you serve. So I think that's true. And I would echo, yeah, that's kind of always been the standard. So that's like the law and the standard, but are you actually seeing that happen in practice? Because I think what you see, at least on the media, is that and what I've heard even from some clients, that there's this fear and lockdown of these agencies that are responsible to get the funds out into the community, that maybe there is some confusion themselves around illegal versus legal DEI. So they're
Yeah,
pulling contracts or they're freezing funds, even if you are doing all of those things.
correct. Correct.
So I guess my question is, in a roundabout way, there's the law, but then there's in practice. Are you
Yep.
seeing violations of this like in practice? Then maybe eventually we'll get self-corrected. It's just we're in a state of confusion right now.
Yeah, so I think so. I don't think I can even separate those two things because the confusion is like the problem, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
so here's what I'm hearing. There are organizations that are being told by an agency that their grant has received a score that they could receive a grant.
Right.
And the question is, and what is being put on them is, so we're concerned about X, Y, and Z language in your grant. Would you like to change it
Mm,
to be in compliance? Or do you want to self-certify that you are not out of compliance? Or do you not want the money?
mm.
And those are the three options, right?
What does that mean,
So,
self-certify? Like I
so
promise I'm
self-certify
following.
basically just means we don't think we're out of compliance. And
Mm,
and if you are found to be out of compliance, they sure can rip that money back,
mm,
right? And so that's again where the confusion lies.
mm,
What is illegal DEI? Are you really going to be held, and can the administration hold you to adhering to an executive order? Because it's not a law,
right.
right? And
Hmm.
it's not written into so very early on, the NEA was one of the first agencies to release new opportunities once they had been all sort of pulled back offline, right?
Yeah.
And one of the requirements was to certify that you would adhere to the executive orders.
Hmm.
That was actually removed in
Hmm.
the months that followed.
Right.
And so, it appears that maybe that's not going to be allowed.
Hmm.
And I have not seen this, but it would not surprise me if that is still out there, right? Some sort of signature phase, whether it's in the application itself or whether it happens in the contracting phase,
Hmm.
um, needing to sign something that says we'll adhere to executive orders. And so that's where I think things get really tricky for organizations and where they really need to be checking in with their own legal counsel. The other question is, so I think the executive order feels a little straight and narrow. It's like, are you going to sign it? Are you not?
Yeah.
Right? I think it gets even trickier when we talk about like this thing you're doing here, raises flags for us because of the words you use. Well, then as an organization, you have to decide, okay, are we going to change it? Right. And if we are going to change it, are we just removing that language completely? I think that's the best case scenario, right? You just get rid of that section because it's
Right.
probably not required if it's
Yeah.
not allowed.
Right.
Right. So,
Right.
so are you willing to strip your grant narrative, and are you willing to trade in the approved words or the words that haven't been disallowed yet?
Mm.
And I always remind organizations like we have been playing games with words forever. Forever.
Hmm.
We we
Hmm.
we we change words, we reclaim words, our language is not static, it changes constantly. is it annoying and frustrating and inflammatory that
Hmm.
a single administration is going to strip language and maybe in the process like strip recognition and identity? Like these are real issues, and
Right,
we've been playing these games for a long time.
right, right. Yeah. I love everything that you're saying because I've thought that oftentimes too. It's like, how do you have principles and guiding principles? And I think some people are like, fine, we'll walk away from, federal funding. But I love your approach though, because then what you were saying earlier, if we decide to not seek these funds and we decide to not get awarded those funds that then will ultimately benefit the communities we're trying to serve anyway, is that in some way setting us back? Is that in some way reiterating the fact that we don't need these funds after all? And oftentimes I find that once we demonstrate some sort of, oh, we don't need these funds, it's hard to get them back. So, um, how do we consider how we continue to play the games? Let's be honest. How do we continue playing the games? And like you said, we always will, right? We always have, we always will. The games will just look differently. I'm curious though, Fielding, from your experience. So I think when we talk about whether organizations should continue to pursue federal funding, whether maybe they've not received federal funding before, but this makes them pause, or maybe organizations that have had federal funding that are so outraged, as many of us are, about the new the changes in how we describe our programming, or the changes in how we describe the communities we're trying to impact. Or there's a lot of emotion around that, rightfully so. But there's probably other factors for which people might question, aside from just principle and some of the things that we're talking about right now, especially DEI is a great example that you're talking about. Are there other things that people should be considering when they decide to pursue or not pursue federal funding? Maybe it's largely in the principle. I'd just love to hear from your perspective. Like, what are the
Yep.
other things that you might say to a client that maybe you should not pursue federal funding, for
Yeah.
example?
Yep. Yep. So, the federal funding has always been a big leap for organizations
Yeah,
going after their first federal grant, whether that is because they're developing internal skill sets to actually pursue federal grants, or whether they're super smart and they're already thinking about compliance, right?
yeah.
Because it is easier to get federal money than it is to manage it. I stay on the pre-award side because it is easier.
And I'm over here on the post-award
Yeah,
side, so it
exactly,
is not
exactly.
easy.
No, it's not easy at all. And so I really respect organizations when they realize that post award is you got to start thinking about post award during pre award when you start thinking about applying, right? So what I maybe one of the silver linings in all of this is the intense focus on compliance that has finally sort of reached the front page, right?
Mhm.
Federal grants in 2025 are about compliance. Like that is now the scary part. And I think it's scary on like a billboard way, right? It's no longer
Mhm.
scary as a footnote. It's like billboard scary. And
Yeah.
so yes, we need to be thinking about compliance. We need to be thinking about legal.
Mhm.
Is your organization going to be willing to stand up and fight to get your money back if it gets
Mhm.
taken, right? I mean,
Mhm.
these are really serious conversations to be thinking through.
Yeah.
So, if an organization has never received federal funding and they are in a build phase, they are building internal capacity, right? I think that is a phase you stick to for the next 6 to 9 months.
Mhm.
Don't apply for the very first time in the middle of all of this mayhem.
Yeah.
It is you will get whiplash, right? We
Yeah.
all have whiplash.
Yeah.
And an organization brand new to federal grants is going to be so frustrated and so
Yeah.
exhausted from that first experience, they'll probably never do it again.
Yeah. It's true.
So honestly, right now, I would say now is the time for education. Now is the time for really shoring up the logic and the theory of the work that you do. So creating logic
Mhm.
models, creating theories of change, getting really, really clear on what it is you would even want from a federal grant.
Mhm.
Um, understanding a federal grants process on the pre-award, but then already thinking about what investments you can make from post-award. So yeah, I mean, kind of sit tight. Keep moving forward, keep educating yourself, keep paying attention to what's happening with the specific agencies you think your organization would be a fit for. Just really quickly going back to um, a little bit of our previous conversation. So the other thing I'm seeing is that like entire um, so we talk about agencies and then there are all these like subcomponents under agencies and sometimes they have
Mhm.
different names. But for example, the Small Business Administration, it appears that entire groups under that administration are gone, like the Women's Business Center, the Minority Business Development Center. Do these things exist anymore?
Mm.
And I think
Mhm.
there's a real question about whether money is going to be coming out of those agencies at all or those sub-agencies at all in 2026.
Yeah.
And so, particularly for nonprofits that might be looking at like maybe they only really fit within one particular, subcomponent of a federal agency, like we need to be paying a lot of attention to what's even going to exist. I wish I knew, right?
Yeah.
I provide training and I don't know what training to develop for
Right.
2026.
Right. Exactly. And I'm afraid we're not going to know.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said and highlight a little bit more as we round out this conversation on like next things to do. But I want to go back to something that you said about organizations that are kind of anticipating applying for these and really asking some key questions on whether we feel like we're ready or not. And you said that compliance is really key. I did a webinar the other day and it was around like internal controls and really talking about audits and what auditors look for in internal controls. And while a lot of people think auditors, the people you hire and you come in and you pay them, but also specifically as I addressed in that webinar was kind of references to federal desk reviews and audits that happen as part of the contracts. And what I see more and more, and I communicated in this webinar, was that there's this concept, and I think what was a bit of the old risk, and the old risk was mismanagement of funds, fraud, embezzlement, right, or just blatant lack of skill. I mean, things are just a mess, right, and that's kind of the obvious glaring issues, or what people suspect or assume is going to come up in an audit. And I work with over 200 clients, over 80% get federal funds. So we see a lot of incoming folks that have had what they call single audits. It's usually in conjunction with their financial statement audit, and then there's an audit on their federal programs. And then they're fielding, as you know, there's usually a nice little opinion letter specific to those controls or those compliance requirements on their federal funds. And the things that they're being flagged for are not sometimes, errors or like misspending, but more often than not, it's some of the other more subtle things that, for example, you did not document expense approvals, or you did not follow a procurement policy, or you did not have adequate subrecipient monitoring, or at least a documented process for that. Maybe you were doing it, but there's no evidence of it anywhere. It's things like that that are there's no suggestion that there's any dollars actually fraudulently spent, mismanaged, stolen, misdirected, not spent. There's no evidence of that. But I had a situation where a new client we just started working with to try to address some of these issues with the federal funds. We talked about lawyers, and of course, you need accountants and all the things. But for this particular organization, needed a PR firm because this was an organization that had a politically polarizing mission, working with immigrants. And the media got caught wind of this audit report. And of course, it was see, all these funds are being misspent and mismanaged, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, none of the comments on the audit report suggested that that was the case. But what I reiterated in this webinar, and I think is worthy of reiterating here, is that I don't think the general public understands like auditor comments and differences between you did not follow a procurement policy. People, I think, immediately jump to a conclusion that you were doing like backdoor deals with some friendly party, but no, it's like I'm supposed to get 3 bids and I only got 2 bids, right? and
Or we
and
didn't have
and
the policy that dictated exactly, or the SOP
yeah,
that, dictated exactly how that was supposed to go.
exactly. So these are all little nuances that
Yeah.
need to be taken into consideration, and really understanding what the inventory of those things are. And then, of course, like, as you've mentioned before, adherence to those things. But I want to reiterate too, like the legal aspect that you mentioned, also bracing yourself depending on your organization, and the climate that we're in. There are going to be watchdogs paying very close attention to the things that you're doing, and there could be a big PR element. So when you said before, are you willing to fight for your money, but also fight for your reputation from kind of a PR perspective, and knowing that when you're stepping into a funding source that has a lot of eyes on it right now, especially.
Mhm.
Do you feel every bit of confidence that you can weather that storm if you're going to have a misstep? And the reality is, this particular organization is the very first time they got federal funds. It's a learning process for them. It was during COVID, so this was years later. The audits finally, all the dust is settled. Um, yeah, and they've since corrected the issue, but it doesn't matter in the media,
Right.
So
Right.
anyway, it's kind of a sad story, but it really just reiterates it's sometimes like the little things that are magnified, maybe unfairly, and there's just some ignorance in, I think, the general public on what these things mean, when it ends up when you kept saying these are big board. I can't even talk today. It's Friday, when we're recording this, but like the big billboard compliance issues. And I was literally thinking, like, yes, this was all over the media on this particular
Oh,
issue, right? Yeah. Um, it's true though, quite
it is.
literally in the world that we're living in. So these things need to be
Yeah.
taken into consideration.
And so the administrative burden of federal grants has increased. I think that's part of like the big takeaway. So number one, you have to be thinking to yourself, are there ways that we can build in capacity into the grant itself? But then number
Mhm.
two, do we have the organizational sophistication and structures to actually pursue this funding? And one of the pieces that I have long been a proponent for are for organizations to start out with their first federal grant actually being in collaboration with an
Mhm.
organization that has more sophisticated infrastructure and potentially some federal grants experience, right?
Mhm.
Because that entity then takes on responsibility for you adhering to things. And so you can go to
Mhm.
that partner and say, hey, we don't actually have a policy about procurement. Could we
Yeah.
see yours? Right.
Right.
And it's a great way to start to build some of that internal capacity and knowledge about what you really need to be doing. And they should help you. And I'll say the same thing for state and local county grants that are federally originating. They
Mhm.
take on, like as the pass-through entity, they take
Mhm.
on the responsibility of making sure that their subrecipients are adhering to the
Yep.
rules. So
Yep.
ask them to support you.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So let's round out for those that are interested in federal grants, or maybe they have them and they're sitting in a moment of panic. I don't know if I'm doing everything right. I think one of the overwhelming, daunting tasks is like, okay, get informed, get educated on these things before you go down the path of, you know, seeking or applying for federal funds. What are some like practical steps, or where you mentioned partnering maybe with an organization? Where else are some practical steps that people can start getting a better understanding of what they don't know, right? Because I think most organizations, when they apply, they probably do so a bit naively, thinking, well, we they don't have the sense of we're not sophisticated enough. A lot of times organizations, they do believe that, only to find out after the fact, maybe not so much. But what are some resources, or where would you point people to go to find out what they don't know?
Yep. A couple of things. So federal agencies themselves have set up and released free training. And that
Mm.
is typically about navigating their particular system. It might be
Hmm.
a little bit about management and compliance. And I spent 10 years piecing all these things together, attending,
Hmm.
1 hour webinars for the Grants Professional Association, or attending all of the pre-applicant content. And I have just found a deep frustration with a lack of like a very clear, like, this is the path to learning federal grants. And then how do you actually like string all that together and understand the subtext? Because there are all of these funky rules that you will never know until someone's like, oh, yeah, that's actually a federal thing. You just have to know it. And you're like, where do I learn it? They're like, by talking to people, right? Like, and
Hmm.
through experience. And so, the my answer to like what is free, go to grants.gov, start like looking through their trainings, go to the agency pages that you think you might align with, take their trainings. If your organization is ready to invest, I have something called the Federal Grants Accelerator, and it's an online community. It's like 15 plus hours of training videos, but it's coaching. It's peer review opportunities. It's really designed for folks who are going after federal grants for the first time or just haven't found much success. And so it's generalizable across the agencies. And really it's just trying to break down those silos, right?
Yeah.
There isn't a ton out there. I mean, number one, there's not a ton of federal grant training that's comprehensive anyway. There are a few options, but
Mhm.
but there really wasn't anything that I could find that really helped people bridge like, okay, I have knowledge, I've watched the videos, but like how do I go do the thing?
Right.
How am I successful in that first application? So that's really that's the bridge that I'm trying to
Yeah.
trying to create there. So that is I'm running a beta this fall, and then that'll open to the general public in January of 26. And
Okay.
hopefully we'll know more about what's going on.
And all of the content you put together, you can go and redo. Like,
It's possible. It's possible. You know, even in the last couple of days, I've been putting together videos not just of grants.gov, but of simpler.grants.gov because there's a whole new, background system that's being set up, a shadow system that is supposed to be simpler. We'll see.
yeah, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, and I really encourage organizations that are kind of sending out someone to seek and gather all this information. We hinted a little bit at the beginning of the conversation. There's like the pre-award stuff. So I think a lot of times people just look at the application and the components of the application. What does that look like, and what do we need just to apply? But looking at the post-award, so looking at some of the compliance requirements or audit guidelines. Those are all public information on the website, although I'm sure not easy to find on those agency websites. But the good
Well,
news
and
is they
I would
rarely
send
update
people,
them.
yeah, yeah. So I would send people to ECFR. So that is the electronic version of the Code of Federal Regulation. Part 200 is for nonprofits. And because it's online, you can just hit like, Control F and like put in the
Yeah,
word that you're looking for. So you can find out really easily that alcohol is not an allowable expense, right? Or you can read the darn thing and it'll put you to sleep over and over again. But I think that's a nice way to kind of learn it. I think the tricky part about compliance is they tell you the what, but they don't
hmm
tell you the how.
How? Yeah,
And they don't tell you what threshold is
right,
appropriate.
right,
And so
right.
that's the real challenge. Like, do you need policies around these things? Yes.
hmm
And finding templates for that kind of stuff can be really helpful. I think honestly, like I'm curious about ChatGPT and like putting in the ECFR into
Mm.
a
I was just
ChatGPT and
thinking
like
that.
and having it write like policy. I don't know if it's any good. So but I'm curious
Yeah.
about that as a low cost option for
hmm
organizations as they try to build out some of these these policies and procedures that they really do need to adhere to, number one, but number two, they need to have them documented. It's
Right.
not enough to just do the thing. So compliance is all about documentation, right? Did you document your process?
Right, right. Well, and that's what I tell people too, that oftentimes people are looking for the exact answer, like it's black or it's white or something to that effect. But what I tell people, the auditors are not really, there is no standard. Sometimes there are, right? Like you said, no alcohol allowed, for example. There are some things that are very specific and they're very clearly laid out. But oftentimes, not just on the federal side, but auditors in general, if it's not clear, it's like we just want you to create a policy. And what they're really testing is, are you adhering to your own policy?
Right.
And it's that inconsistency or lack of adherence that becomes then the problem. And it's interesting. I've had this is a side tangent, but I've had conversations before about a particular funder that had an issue with their policy. It was like an operating reserve policy. We had more money than what we said we were going to have, and then it's like, okay, well, what do we need to do? And it's like, oh, well, you just need to update your policy. So like
Right.
so instead of just saying we're going to have this percentage of reserves, we just change it and the board approves it and then all of a sudden we're good now. Okay. Like that seems like an easy fix. So it's the lack of compliance to one's own policy. Oftentimes that is the issue, which, I don't know, we could debate that all day or not, whether that should be the issue or not, but that's really what auditors are looking for. So Fielding, I want to wrap up here, but I want to do a shameless plug for the accelerator that you're getting ready to launch. You hinted on a little bit. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about it? And more importantly, where can we connect with you or find out more about this accelerator? If there are people listening to this conversation, maybe more hopeful, I hope, at least I
Yeah.
feel a little bit more hopeful about federal grants, but probably equally as overwhelmed and they need some support. Like, where could they go to get this info?
Yeah, so my website is jezreelconsulting.com, Jezreel consulting.com. On that page, you can sign up for a free weekly newsletter where I talk about federal grants and AI and grants. Those are my true loves right now. And then if they're interested in the accelerator itself, you can find that information on my webpage. I'm also on LinkedIn. My personal page, I would say, is pretty fun and exciting and maybe a little edgy. And the business page is where you can find all about, kind of, when the doors open for the accelerator and more
Hmm.
information.
Okay.
The accelerator itself, I think the piece that I'm most excited about is really helping people find other folks who are in the same
Mm,
position, right?
community.
Because there is so much just relief that comes from being able to say, oh my gosh, this is so frustrating. Someone help me get through this,
Yeah.
right? Or, oh my gosh, what is this crazy question? I've never seen this on a grant application ever. I don't even know how to start approaching this,
Yeah.
right? And we can have those discussions. People can peer review for one another. Like I really want this space to be learning and action combined. And so I've spent most of my time like creating the educational content, but I think the real magic is going to be in the in the relationships that are built in this community and the
Sure.
coaching support that keeps people in action mode.
There's so much power in not feeling alone, and
Yeah.
helping to navigate. And it's amazing, while you're an amazing facilitator with a wealth of knowledge, there is quite a bit of power in learning from other people as well. That part is really invaluable. So thank you for that. We will definitely put your website in our show notes for anybody looking to connect with you. Fielding, this has been awesome. It's always fun to catch up with you and hear more about what's going on in the world of federal funding to the degree we can keep up. For those of you listening, this has been a pleasure having you join us. If you found this content at all helpful, please, you know what to do. Engage with it in some way in the meta world so that other leaders of nonprofits can find information like this and hopefully solve some of their problems. Thank you all for listening. See you next time.